All the NFL pundits unanimously agree that this might be the most trade-heavy draft that we have seen in quite some time. Jordan Schultz was the first one on this Broncos country. He says the expectation among many NFL teams is that the 2026 draft will be one of the more trade-heavy drafts in recent memory, according to multiple league sources. So on this episode of the Broncos Breakdown, welcome in, by the way, my name is Moose, we're going to explore what Denver could do with said trades. Now, I do expect teams to get very trade-heavy, just like that report indicates. Where do the Broncos fit in on all of that? I do expect Denver to get a little bit active in the upcoming weeks. And I'll just read you really quickly the full quote from the report and then talk a little bit about where Denver fits into all of this. Here's what Jordan Schultz said verbatim. Specifically, on the defensive side of the ball, edge, corner, and linebacker are all strong and deep, while wide receiver is typically considered to be the most talented offensive position in this draft. Several executives I've spoken with believe we're likely to see a flurry of activity in the first half of round one. Additionally, because the specific draft lacks depth in the later rounds, many teams plan to pursue extra day 2 and early day 3 picks per league sources. That is where I believe the Broncos are going to get most active. Rounds 2, rounds 3, rounds 4, and rounds 5. Those 4 rounds are where the Broncos are going to manipulate up and down the draft boards. And why do I believe this? What makes me think that the Broncos are going to go out and make a ton of trades? George Paton said it himself. They're already talking about it behind closed doors. Now, they're not going to divulge anything specific because that's not how the Broncos do business. But Paton gave you a very telling quote at the NFL owners meeting. Here's what he said. We fortunately have been here before without a first-round pick is what he's talking about. I think 2 different times. And so we've had a good feel for where we can hone in. It doesn't mean that we won't trade up at some point, hint number 1. But we'll have a really good feel for the 62nd pick or whatever we're picking. Second hint, we have a pretty good feel for that round. All right, so here's what we're going to do on this episode. I'm going to explore 3 separate trades the Broncos could make in order to get more draft picks. None of these, by the way, are my original ideas. I'm just expanding on them, and what I have seen most unanimously is agreed upon by Broncos content creators as to what the Broncos could be doing in terms of players they could trade away or picks they could trade away. All of these, by the way, list different outcomes for the Broncos during the draft. So I'll give you some of my thoughts based off of what these trades are kind of scattered around social media, the internet, and different news articles, et cetera, et cetera. So I've kind of comboed it down to 3 separate trades to what I believe Denver could end up doing. The very first one is the Broncos trade Jarrett Stidham to Green Bay. Now, there's no link to Green Bay per se, but you have to start thinking about the teams that need a backup quarterback. And it's starting to get lower and lower and lower. And Green Bay is still one of those teams that is without a backup quarterback. So I think this could be a perfect spot for Jarrett Stidham. And Sayer, one of our good Broncos content creators, actually is on board with me as well. And here's what he had to say about the Broncos trading Stiddy to Green Bay. He said, there was talk about a team like the Packers also being interested in Cousins as a backup. And obviously Kirk Cousins signed with the Raiders. But the point is that there are a number of teams in the high-end backup quarterback market, or at least in theory, some of those teams might be willing to throw a pick at the Broncos to get Stidham for just $6.5 million this season. The reason this might have some legs is because Sean Payton recently stated that the Broncos would have a competition for the QB2 role this year. He followed up by saying that it wouldn't be any different from last year, but Sam Ehlinger never took second-team reps last year, and at least not in camp. And this is also built upon that quote from Diana Rossini, who we know back at the beginning of March reported that Jarrett Stidham was already getting trade calls. So the Broncos were already exploring at some point trading Jarrett Stidham, or at least taking phone calls on him. So it's already at the top of their mind. And we also know, to continue on with this, that the Broncos had a Zoom meeting with the quarterback already, Ethan Kaliakmanis from Rutgers. So if the Broncos have already explored trade calls on Jarrett Stidham, if in theory teams have already been, interested in a reliable backup and they're in need of a backup, plus the Broncos are already hosting quarterback workouts, what does that tell you? Stidham is a movable asset. So in this hypothetical trade that I've cooked up, and this is mine, I've got Jarrett Stidham going to Green Bay for a 2026 fifth-round pick number 160. Now, before any of you get down to the comment section, that is a complete, there's no way we're trading Stiddy for a fifth. We need at least a third. I'll remind you that last year, all of the backup quarterbacks, and that's what Stiddy is, he's a backup, all the backup quarterbacks went for a sixth, a fifth, and a fifth. These were all of the 2025 backup quarterback trades last year. All of them went for sixths or fifths, and Stidham is no different. Stidham is right in the middle of here. You could maybe, for a desperate team like the Jets, because they also need a backup quarterback, you could maybe squeeze a fourth. But right now, the ideal compensation looks like a fifth. But I'm not done with the Stidham trade. That's not all I'm willing to do, not just settle for a fifth. I've decided to combo and parlay those picks into a third-round pick. So I call up the Pittsburgh Steelers in this hypothetical trade after I've traded Jarrett Stidham to Green Bay. And I'm saying, I want your third-round pick. What am I willing to give up? How about pick number 111 and pick number 160 to get pick number 76 from the Steelers? They get 2 picks. We get 1. It's a third-round pick. I think with their abundance of draft capital right now, they've got 12 picks, which is the most in this entire draft. And Steelers fans and Steelers aggregates unanimously agree that they're not going to end up with 12. They're going to try and dump some of those picks. So my guess is the Broncos could easily swindle that third-round pick out of Pittsburgh. And I would do this in a heartbeat. I'd give up 111 and 160 for a third-round pick number 76. Would you make this trade? You let me know down in the comment section down below. A fourth and a fifth. By the way, that's not our only fourth, right? We've got, I believe it's 130. So you can get back into the third round, which you gave up for in the Jalen Waddle trade by calling up Omar Khan from Pittsburgh and making this deal. All right, our second trade. This one's probably going to anger some of you, but hear me out. There's a reason behind this. Trade Dondrea Tillman. Now, Dondrea Tillman has proven to be a very, very reliable edge, a rotational edge. And I know that there have been moments where Dondrea Tillman has shined. I know that on special teams he's had some really good plays, but I also think that Dondrea Tillman is one of those pieces that is movable because of the depth that we've got with Jonah Ellis, who we know is going to be taking some snaps at inside linebacker, but also Q Robinson. And that's the most important name in all of this. The Broncos, according to Zach Stevens, are incredibly high on Q. They want to give him more snaps. And if they believe that he can take the place of a guy like Q Robinson, or maybe even be better than Dondrea Tillman, then it makes sense to move one of those pieces for draft capital. And if you look at the Broncos' edge room right now, I think out of all of the players on this edge room, Tillman is probably the one that you'd be most willing to part with. Actually, probably the most willing to part with is Dondrea Tillman. And look, I'm a fan of his. I think he could be a very, very good rotational or maybe even a lower-end starter for a desperate team. Last year's stats were pretty damn good, right? 41 tackles, 3 for loss, 4 sacks, 9 quarterback hits, and a PFF grade of 68.5. So I'm not picking him or trading him for nothing. But I also know that the Bryce Huff deal is about exactly what you would be looking for, which was last year between the San Francisco 49ers and the Philadelphia Eagles. And Bryce Huff was a starter. So he has a leg up there on Dondrea Tillman. And this is what the Eagles received for Bryce Huff. A fifth rounder, and they saved a couple of dollars, but a fifth rounder that could have become a fourth. And I think this is probably what you'd be looking at. And for those of you who are like, there's no way we would ever get a fifth or shouldn't get something higher for Dondrea Tillman, I'll remind you, these are very similar players. Take a look at their numbers. In fact, you can make the argument that Bryce Huff is a little bit better. So, again, for a 5th-round pick, I think you would move Dondrea Tillman in a heartbeat. And maybe that could be a conditional 5th, right? Something very similar to what Philadelphia did. Make that 5th turn into a 4th if he gets enough starting rotation or starting snaps. So who's a team that is in desperate need of some edge help? I know the Lions have been constantly talking about they were high on Max Crosby. They made calls. They want more edge help. So rather than go out and draft someone in, the 3rd or the 4th round, you just send them Dondrea Tillman. You send him somebody that could probably get you 5 to 6 sacks if he ends up becoming a starter, and you get the 5th-round pick, number 157. I would make this trade immediately. And, for everybody that is all up in arms about the draft compensation, I highly recommend you go do some homework yourself about the recent trades. That is kind of like where all the GMs will look at recent trades to determine the price for a player. And this feels right, a 5th-round pick. You know what else feels right and the price is right? Shirts for the Broncos Breakdown. If you want to be the one to sport your very own Broncos Breakdown hat, Mile High Waddle t-shirt, celebration tee, or any sort of Best in the West item that we've got t-shirts, we've got hoodies, make sure that you use the link that I've put in the comments and description of today's video, chatsports.com/BB shop, or just click the link, like I said, that I put in the comments and description of today's video. All right, the last trade is not a trade that involves any players. It's just picks. So Denver trades again with New Orleans in this hypothetical trade scenario. This one, I believe, is probably most likely to happen, is this last one, because we know that Payton's connection is deep in New Orleans. And we saw evidence of that earlier late last offseason when we traded Devon Vele to the New Orleans Saints. And we made a video on it, actually. So the Saints traded for Devon, and we ended up getting a 4th-round pick. We kind of swindled Mickey Loomis out of some picks, and I believe that we could swindle a couple more. But in this one, it's a combo of picks. This could be an easy way for Denver to get back that 3rd-round pick that we want so desperately back, and to combo more 4th-rounders. So, first things first. On the surface of this trade, you're not going to like what I have to say, but just stick around until after it's done, because you'll like it more after it's over. So, The Athletic was the first one to kind of posture this, and here's what they said. The Saints get our 2nd-round pick, number 62, and the Broncos get a 3rd-round pick, number 73, and a 4th-round pick, number 132, which would leave the Broncos on the surface without a 1st or a 2nd. You might think to yourself, that is a no-go whatsoever, until you combo or flip some of those picks, which I have suggested here with the Minnesota Vikings. George Payton has the connection with the Vikings. The Vikings have no 4th-round picks. They've got 2 thirds and 1 second. So why not move up, go get that 2nd-round pick to number 49, so improve your 2nd-round pick, and give up 2 of the 4th-rounders, because in this trade, we get another 4th from the Saints, and then we have 3 fourths. So if we give up 2 to go up back into the 2nd, we still have our own 4th-round pick. Does that make sense? Or actually, you'd have the Saints, because we'd give up our 4th-rounder at 132. So we would have the 2nd pick, and we'd still get our 4th, and we'd have a 3rd that we got from the Saints. So we'd end up with a 2nd, 3rd, and a 4th. Whew. I'm wheeling and dealing right now. That's all I can say. Maybe I got to get on the phone and call up George Payton and give him some of my ideas. He probably would tell me to F off, but you get my point. There's a lot of different scenarios in which the Broncos can end up with more draft capital. That's just one of the ways that I have postured up. By the way, we're going to be live for whatever moves happen, no matter what, all 3 days. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Join us. We are going to be live, like I said, for all 3 days. Help us get to 59,000. As always, Broncos country, a mile high salute. Be cool.